with in November of last year when they released 3.5. Seems to be the only topic that everybody is talking about, especially in tech.
Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of the AIM Media House podcast, Simulated Reality. Today we have with us the co-founder and CEO of Tredence, Shub Bhowmick. Welcome, Shub. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you, Kashyap, for having me.
Fantastic, great. We are going to talk on something very topical, generative AI. We are going to try and identify what are the boundless potential of generative AI. While many of the applications today are in POCs and some are in production as well, we want to kind of see where this technology takes us. What does the leadership of Tredence think where it is going to take us, and what does this mean for enterprises across the globe, right? Generative AI has been increasingly influential and transformative in various industries right now. But to begin with, could you share your perspective on how generative AI aligns with industry trends, right? And how it is shaping the future of some of the businesses across sectors? Let's set some context and then maybe we can take it from there.
Sure, sure. I mean, I think it's amazing how this word, I had never heard of use of the word hallucination in my industry until we all came across this explosion, created by even early OpenAI to begin with in November of last year when they released 3.5, and since then this is the seems to be the only topic that everybody is talking about, especially in technology, right? All new startups are getting funded that have a Gen AI thesis. A lot of enterprise AI conversations around generative AI, and even service providers like ourselves are preparing our solutions that are meant to take this core capability and drive business outcomes on top of that, right? Now, I do believe this is very transformative, Kashyap. This has already democratized AI, right? We used to talk about AI for a long time. I mean, if you obviously, we used to call it advanced data science and applied analytics and just AI for the longest time. And in the last 10 months, we have been using the concept of generative AI. But the idea is not very different, right? It's about how do you take data, information that you already have within your firewall, or leverage other sources of data that you can procure from third-party sources, and then help your executives make more meaningful decisions, right, to improve their businesses and improve their bottom line or top lines. Specifically around generative AI, Kashyap, we are doing a few different things. One, we are working a lot on contextualization, right? How do you take those foundational models and fine tune them, or even use simpler techniques like RAG or prompt engineering, or more advanced situations where the client is asking us to build a LLM. So we are taking various ideas around contextualization and making it more relevant for the business that we're working with, the customer that we're working with. So that's number one. Number two is more around coding assistance, right? I mean, obviously, there is a recognition in the industry that this is going to meaningfully help improve the productivity of our engineers, right? Data scientists, engineers, all kinds of engineers, data engineers, software engineers, and so on, right? But I think when we take a new business specification and code that into a software, there are two steps. Step one is taking the business requirements and writing the technical specs. And step two is taking the technical specs and actually writing the code. I do believe that step one will continue to be done by experts and domain specialists like Tredence. Step two will progressively get automated thanks to various forms of large language models, and that's where we are investing a lot in trying to build those capabilities and internally training our people around that, right?
Yeah.
um, yeah, and there are many other dimensions in which we are developing our capabilities, but I'll take a pause there and let you ask any follow-ups.
Yeah, one of the things that you said stuck with me, right? We used to call it advanced analytics or advanced data science, and then we moved to AI and then Gen AI. Do you think that in a lot of sense, this technology or the underlying fundamentals have not changed in a lot of sense, but is generative AI really different from, let's say, at what we called advanced analytics in 2012 or 2013 for that matter, right? So what is your take on that?
The fundamental premise, which is to use a good data foundation and predict and optimize your decisions better, right? Make better use of your resources. And we all live in a constrained resource world, right? So
Yeah.
that fundamental premise to leverage all the resources that are available to you and use it in the most balanced and optimal way, that premise has not changed, right? And that is what the purpose of data science or AI is, right? But generative AI is a different kind of AI, right? I mean, the version of generative AI that we leverage in text and NLP is called, large language models, right? There are other forms of generative AI that we are now starting to see in image and other forms of unstructured data, right? And so that's a new form of AI, right? I mean, it's the same way. 15 years back, we used to have gradient boosting models. Then last 10, 7 or 8 years, we have been playing with neural nets and deep learning. And last 10 months, the world is now going crazy around large language models. Having said that, Kashyap, I assume you know this, the concept of large language models is not new. I mean, we have been working on large language models for close to 3 years now. Simpler form of large language models like BERT, etc., right? What ChatGPT has done, what OpenAI has done, it has really democratized the use of this in the context of even day-to-day B2C contexts. For example, my daughter in high school, now she started college, she started using it, right? Even my kids have the ChatGPT app on their Apple Watches and they're interacting with that. So if a 10-year-old can start using AI and start understanding what AI can do for you, that's sort of what has happened in the last 10 months, which is new, which is very, very new for this world.
It's interesting how we are talking about democratization of AI, and even really young people to everyone starting to use generative AI to a large extent. But in some of the conversations that I've had, I've seen there are some challenges in terms of the adoption. Like even if you give a really, let's say, enterprise copilot run by Gen AI, right? The adoption is really still a issue. Is that something that you're already seeing, or and if yes, then how are you overcoming this adoption challenges when it comes to generative AI? Or if not, then why so?
Yeah, so there are, I mean, like any new technology, risks that, decision makers have to consider before rolling out these technologies across the organization, right? Now, what are those adoption impediments and risks, right? Let's go through them one by one. One is cost, right? It is expensive. It is expensive, especially if you're looking to create a new model from scratch. It is an extremely expensive proposition. Right now we are hearing about the constraints around the production of GPUs by NVIDIA, right? So there are constraints at the silicon layer, right? The underlying silicon layer, and then the cost of training a new model from scratch. And again, there also we are starting to see innovations like Mosaic ML, which is basically a new form of hyperscaler, which enables you to more optimally train a new large language model, right? Which our current the other core hyperscalers are kind of still catching up, right? So cost is one. Second is security, right? There are still concerns around security, right? Hey, is my data, especially in highly regulated industries like financial services and healthcare, there is a lot of concern about the data leaving the premises, right, to your firewall, right? Third is around, infrastructure, right? The setting up of the infrastructure as well, right? It's not inexpensive to set up that entire infrastructure, what we now call LLM ops, right? LLM infrastructure, right? It is not about copying and pasting a bunch of Lego pieces, right? It requires a different kind of nuanced and architect to kind of consider all these trade-offs and pros and cons as he or she is putting this together, right? Fourth, a big one is, accuracy and performance of these solutions, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, hallucination is a problem, right? And obviously, there are a number of LLM solutions out there, but it's not one size fits all, right? Depending on the situation, some a cheaper model may work better for you if you're able to tweak it and tune it appropriately, right? And there are other techniques like RAG, etc., to further reduce the hallucination. So if you want to use large language model for, let's say, the way we used to think about business intelligence and BI, right, where that was very deterministic, there was nothing probabilistic about it, right? Hey, I want to know what my sales was for the last 2 weeks in this category in this part of the world, right? I'm not asking a model to predict that answer. It's a simple query. But so far, large language models are not very effective in these kind of deterministic use cases, right? I mean, there's a lot of innovation happening even in this space. How do you use large language models to convert a query into a SQL, and then once you get the information back, how do you take that information and present it in a chart or a blurb that can be sent out by email? But all these things are still evolving, right? And yeah, we are also working very closely with our clients in helping them, number one, identify an initial short list of use cases, right? And putting those use cases in a 2 by 2, feasibility versus, cost versus other trade-off parameters, right? So helping our clients do those diagnostics. Second, we are working with several clients and setting up that LLM infrastructure, right? How do you set it up without compromising on security, without compromising on other important requirements that the client has, right? Entire organization, including our chief information security officer, is starting to get involved in these conversations, right? Third, it's about actually starting to do POCs. You mentioned POCs at the beginning of the call, right? POCs and then and then on an array of use cases. For example, knowledge management is a very interesting use case, Kashyap, right? Knowledge management is an area where you can, imagine, right? Why is chat gpt very interesting for us? Because we ask a question and it has, taken, I don't know how many, billions and trillions of tokens, based on data that has been scraped from the internet, and it's able to give us answers in a very beautiful conversational format, right? Now imagine, instead of the internet, if the source of your information was your internal knowledge portal, right? All the information that you have inside your company, right? And then when you ask that question, you get the response in a very similar chat GPT type format where you have those three paragraphs with the paragraph in between kind of in bullet, etc. Right? So knowledge management is another use cases, but that we're working with a number of our clients, as well as internally we have leveraged it, and we have created a beautiful system which really amazes me. Even when I see the response coming back, it's out of the world.
One of the things that that I come to think of it is the kind of changes that individuals or professionals within organizations, not just building generative AI, but at the same time consuming generative AI, have to go through, right? Can you kind of help us understand how organizations or you at a CEO level can strategically enable this adapting to these new changes, right? Let's start from the perspective of a service provider, from a Tredence perspective, right? What are some of the changes that you have done? Because I'm sure that some of the analysts, some of the professionals building AI or analytics had a different approach, but they need a different mindset when it comes to Gen AI, right? Considering the complexity, the speed, and the other factors while building. At the same time, end users of this technology, what are some of the changes that they have to make? And at the same time, how does the leadership at a strategic level enable this?
Yeah. So first and foremost, Kashyap, I think we should not say no, right?
Okay.
We should not try to stop it. We should not try to resist it. I still run into leaders who are rejective about this, right? Hey, it's another short-term phenomenon. It's a hype that will die, right? I don't think this is similar to some of the other situations in the past where the hype has indeed died, right? This is going to be very much part of our future. So there is no point trying to, resist this evolution, right? Having said that, there are challenges. We talked about a number of challenges in the last 5 minutes, right? There are some challenges, there are risks that need to be considered, but there are ways to slowly start and explore use cases, right? A lot of the customers are starting with productivity use cases, right? Where you are not necessarily touching anything to do with your customer data, but you're starting to look at your internal information and within the boundaries of your firewall, what kind of POCs and experiments can you start running? Now, number two, from a generative AI led, code, can I reduce the number of, let's say, or improve the productivity of my engineers, right? That's another use case. I think it's still very early stage as far as those use cases are concerned, but I'm well talking to my colleagues in the Bay Area, given, you and I both live in the Silicon Valley, I'm starting to see this happening very meaningfully now, right? But has the broader enterprise mainstream Fortune 500 industries adopted it? Not yet, right? Because of some of the other constraints that we talked about. Number three, I think from setting up the infrastructure perspective, companies have started exploring that, right? And also around use cases where which doesn't touch your customer data, but let's say you are leveraging some third-party data into building certain capabilities. For example, in the financial services, in the capital banking industry, which does a bunch of M&A, right? Can I leverage generative AI to accelerate my ability to scout all that information and identify theses that are aligned with my investment areas, right? Can I do all this more productively? Can I reduce the number of manual steps, right, while I go through this, and hence expand my horizon and expand the scope of my research? So these kind of use cases I'm actually starting to see pretty regularly now, and I have no doubt in the 6 months later when we are having this similar conversation again, Kashyap, we will see a lot more of such use cases, right? But I think touching any experiment with customer data is probably going to happen a little bit down the line as far as this maturity curve is concerned, given the risks associated with all kinds of regulations and so on.
Yeah, I think risks is one of the most important things. Enterprises, especially after some of the bigger incidents that happen after the use of Gen AI technologies like ChatGPT and OpenAI APIs, right? Organizations are really worried about the security threat to it, right? Since we're talking about boundless potential, and our enterprises still show a lot of fear, they are not very open to the idea of enabling Gen AI technologies because of the very reason of security threat. Do you see this fear dying down very soon, or will this be again a hard sell for organizations like Tredence to overcome before you convince the consumers that there will be? Also, how real is the risk, and how can you kind of calm their minds in terms of this adoption so that we use it to its huge potential that it is?
Yeah, the risk is there, but like I said, the risk is something that will need to be managed and mitigated, and it should not come at the cost of not embracing the technology, right? 'Cause every industry is different, Kashyap, right? Verticals that deal with more, consumer data, consumer level data, obviously they have to be more careful, right? Some industries like financial services, which relates to money or healthcare, is going to be more, will have to be more careful because they're a lot more regulated and the cost of making a mistake is very, very high, right? But we will, even banking and financial services clients that we are speaking with, they're trying to figure out ways to adopt. And the good thing is a lot of this pressure is actually now coming from top down, all the way from CEO's office.
Yeah.
So this is not just a bottom up, experimentation. This is coming top down as well because CEOs don't want to be left behind, right? And if you are able to leverage this new technology to gain, let's say, 2 or 3 basis points of improvement in your bottom line, and if you are the one who's left behind and others in your industry have kind of leapfrogged, then you don't want to be in that boat, right? So I think given the commercial acknowledgement and pressure, given the reality and some of the benefits that these use cases are actually starting to drive meaningfully, this is very much part of our future, Kashyap. So the risks
Yeah.
will be managed, but they will not become fundamental impediments in actually moving in the right direction.
Okay. Consider that, all of these risks are not there. Like, let's just assume a hypothetical world where there is no risks of Gen AI technology in terms of data security, data privacy, or hallucinations, right? What does Can you walk us and help the audience understand what does the operations in an enterprise look like? Maybe take a few use cases in the short term as well as in the long term, right? How does Gen AI revolutionize? What is its potential? Let's help the audience kind of visualize and understand, right? Like if you see the Iron Man movie with with him having a co-pilot and him continuously enabling everyday actions really streamlined, but probably that's just too much of a science fiction. But in a short term, if you kind of help our audience visualize what does Gen AI mean to organizational operations as well as in the long term, that would be a great ending to our podcast.
Sure, sure. So, at the cost of being repetitive, I'll say a couple of things and then I will end with something a little bit more futuristic, but I don't think it's too much out in the future, right? So, knowledge management is a use case, right? Organizations are leveraging Gen AI to take their internal knowledge and create similar conversational AI format on top of that information, right? Gen AI based productivity development is a serious use case. Now, the productivity can come because your engineering staff becomes more productive. They're able to produce more with less, or it could be because your business operations, right? For example, your ability to create new creatives, etc. Right? This podcast, this conversation that you and are having right now, potentially instead of me or you, might have two humanoids having this conversation, right? So all those things will start happening, right? And especially in certain operations which can be more automated using generative AI will start happening, right? From document, your ability to read and quickly process a large, complicated PDF, legal document. We are starting to see a number of use cases around this, right? So your dependence on paralegals to do all that legal heavy lifting for you, that is likely to get more and more automated and streamlined, right? The last thing I would say is, there was in 2013, there was a movie called Her, Her, right? And
Yeah,
this is something that my co-founder recently mentioned in a similar event, when an event where we were speaking about Gen AI. So this lead character, Theodore, right, played by Joaquin Phoenix,
yeah,
he speaks to a assistant that is basically an AI, which sits in some kind of an iPhone type device in his pocket all the time, right? And she is so real. The voice in that device is so real that you know he literally kind of falls in love with her, right?
yeah.
Obviously, the reciprocation is very artificial because she is only a machine at the end of the day. But he falls in love with her. So eventually, we will start seeing these kind of B2C use cases, Kashyap, where, I mean, this was a very Hollywoodish example, but we'll start seeing similar examples where we will start seeing these kind of assistants in our daily lives. I will carry one with me to help me plan my day, and so on and so forth, right? So yeah, this is real. We should figure out a way to embrace it, learn from it, make sure we manage the risks and not get in trouble and so on.
Fantastic. On that positive note of the bright future for generative AI, thank you so much, Shub, for making the time for this interview. I really appreciate it. I hope the audience really also is intrigued by your insights as I was. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.